put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The $420 tweet that nearly destroyed Tesla. August 7th, 2018. A single tweet, 7 words, $42 billion in phantom money, and the beginning of what the SEC would later call the most brazen securities fraud in modern corporate history. This is the story of how Elon Musk nearly obliterated everything he'd built with 2 words that were never true. Funding secured. But the real question isn't what happened that day. The real question is what he was running from. Tesla's stock had been bleeding for months. Short sellers, the vultures of Wall Street who bet against failing companies, were circling with unprecedented aggression. They'd borrowed billions worth of Tesla shares, waiting for the collapse they believed was inevitable. Production delays, cash burn rates that terrified analysts, a CEO who seemed to be unraveling in real time on social media. The shorts weren't just betting against Tesla. They were publicly mocking Musk, questioning his sanity, his competence, his vision, and it was driving him to the edge. Inside Tesla's Fremont factory, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. Musk had been sleeping on the factory floor, subsisting on Ambien and paranoia, desperately trying to hit production targets for the Model 3 that seemed mathematically impossible. He called it production hell. But that phrase doesn't capture the desperation. Tesla was burning through nearly $1 billion every quarter. Wall Street analysts were openly speculating about bankruptcy. Bond ratings were collapsing. And every day the short sellers were making millions as Tesla's stock price crumbled. Musk had always hated the shorts, but by summer 2018, that hatred had metastasized into something darker, an obsession. He tweeted attacks. He accused them of market manipulation. He compared them to thieves trying to destroy a company that was trying to save the planet. But the shorts had numbers on their side. Tesla's fundamentals looked catastrophic, and they were winning. Then, on July 31st, something changed. Yasir Al-Rumayyan, the managing director of Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, visited Tesla's Fremont factory. The PIF was one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, managing over $250 billion. They'd already bought a 5% stake in Tesla earlier that year. Nearly $2 billion worth of shares purchased on the open market. The meeting seemed cordial. Al-Rumayyan expressed interest in Tesla's future. They discussed various possibilities, but nothing concrete emerged. No terms, no commitment, no deal. What happened next would trigger the largest securities fraud investigation in SEC history. August 7th, 2018, 12:48 p.m. Eastern Time. Musk was being driven to the airport, his mind churning with the relentless pressure of the shorts, the production nightmares, the financial scrutiny. He pulled out his iPhone, and he typed a message that would detonate across global financial markets. "Am considering taking Tesla private at $420. Funding secured." The number wasn't random. $420 per share represented a 20% premium over Tesla's current stock price. At that valuation, a take-private transaction would require roughly $72 billion, one of the largest leveraged buyouts in corporate history. But there was something else about that number, 420. In cannabis culture, it's a reference to marijuana. Musk would later claim he thought his girlfriend, the musician Grimes, would find it funny. He'd added a 20% premium to $419, rounding it to $420 as a joke that would cost him everything. The market's reaction was instantaneous and violent. Tesla's stock, which had been trading around $342, surged. Trading was halted multiple times due to volatility. By the end of the day, shares had jumped more than 10%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization materialized from nothing. Short sellers were being obliterated, forced to cover their positions at catastrophic losses. Some lost hundreds of millions in hours. But inside Tesla's board of directors, panic was spreading. Board members had received no warning about Musk's tweet. No discussion. No legal review. Nothing. The general counsel was frantically trying to understand what funding Musk was referring to. Investment bankers were scrambling. Because here's the thing about taking a $72 billion company private. You need $72 billion. And nobody at Tesla knew where that money was supposed to come from. Musk followed up with more tweets over the next hour, each one digging the hole deeper. Investor support is confirmed. Only reason why this is not certain is that it's contingent on a shareholder vote. He made it sound inevitable. A done deal waiting only for formalities. The financial media exploded. CNBC, Bloomberg, Reuters. Everyone was trying to confirm the story, to identify the mystery investors with tens of billions ready to deploy. But no one could find them, because they didn't exist. The truth was far darker and more reckless than anyone imagined. Musk had no formal commitment from the Saudi PIF, no signed term sheet, no binding agreement, no confirmed financing whatsoever. What he had was a casual conversation from a week earlier, and his own desperate interpretation of what Al-Rumayyan might have implied. The PIF had expressed vague interest in supporting Tesla, but expressing interest and committing $60 billion to a leveraged buyout are separated by a universe of legal and financial complexity. Musk had taken ambiguity and transformed it into certainty, wishful thinking masquerading as secured funding. Over the following days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Musk published a blog post attempting to explain his reasoning, revealing that he'd been in discussions with the Saudi fund since 2017. He claimed they'd repeatedly expressed interest in taking Tesla private, but the PIF's managing director, Al-Rumayyan, wasn't confirming anything. In fact, he was quietly backing away. Behind the scenes, PIF officials were shocked by Musk's public announcement. They'd had preliminary discussions, nothing more. They certainly hadn't committed to the largest private equity transaction in history, based on a factory tour and casual conversation. Tesla's board scrambled to contain the damage. They formed a special committee to evaluate a potential take-private transaction, trying to give legitimacy to Musk's claims. They hired financial advisors, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Silver Lake. But the advisors quickly discovered what everyone feared. There was no deal to evaluate. The PIF wasn't committing. Other potential investors who might have participated were spooked by the public circus. By mid-August, it was clear the take-private plan was dead. On August 24th, Musk published another blog post announcing that Tesla would remain public after all. He blamed the decision on investor feedback and the complexities of the process. He didn't mention that the funding he'd claimed was secured had never actually existed. But the SEC wasn't about to let this vanish quietly. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal investigation within days of the initial tweet. Securities fraud is one of the few areas where the government moves with predatory speed. Because what Musk had done wasn't just reckless, it was potentially criminal. Federal securities law is built on a simple principle. Public companies cannot lie about material information that affects stock prices, and funding secured for a $72 billion buyout is about as material as information gets. SEC investigators subpoenaed documents, emails, text messages. They interviewed Tesla board members, advisors, and Musk himself. What they found was damning. Musk's own communications proved he knew the funding wasn't secured. He'd never discussed specific terms with the PIF. He'd never received written confirmation. He'd never even calculated how much financing would actually be needed. because he didn't know how many shareholders would participate versus taking cash. The entire announcement was built on fantasy, desperation, and a reckless disregard for the law. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. The SEC discovered something else buried in the evidence. Text messages between Musk and close associates revealed his real motivation. This wasn't about taking Tesla private for operational reasons. This wasn't about removing quarterly earnings pressure or focusing on long-term innovation. This was about destroying the short sellers. Musk had become so consumed by his war with the shorts that he'd weaponized securities fraud. He knew a credible take-private announcement would trigger a massive short squeeze. Shorts would be forced to cover, buying shares at inflated prices, suffering enormous losses. It was financial warfare, and it was illegal. On September 27, 2018, the SEC filed a lawsuit against Elon Musk in federal court. The complaint was scathing. It accused Musk of securities fraud, of making false and misleading statements that caused significant confusion and disruption in the market for Tesla's stock and resulting harm to investors. The SEC sought to bar Musk from serving as an officer or director of any public company, a corporate death sentence that would force him out of Tesla entirely. Wall Street was stunned. The idea of Tesla without Musk was unthinkable. He was the company's visionary, its public face, its chief engineer. If he was barred, Tesla's stock would collapse. And it did. Shares plunged 14% the day the lawsuit was announced, wiping out $7 billion in market value. The shorts, battered by the August squeeze, were suddenly profitable again. Musk's gambit to destroy them had failed spectacularly. For 48 hours, chaos reigned. Musk's lawyers were negotiating desperately with the SEC. Tesla's board was in emergency sessions. Major investors were panicking. The entire company teetered on the edge of complete collapse. And Musk, characteristically, was defiant. He wanted to fight the charges in court, convinced he could win, that he could prove the PIF really had committed, that his tweets were justified. But cooler heads prevailed. On September 29th, Musk settled with the SEC without admitting or denying guilt. The terms were humiliating but survivable. Musk would step down as Tesla's chairman for 3 years. He could remain as CEO, but Tesla would appoint 2 independent directors to the board. The company would implement controls over Musk's communications, particularly his tweets about material company information. Both Musk and Tesla would pay $20 million in penalties, $40 million total, to be distributed to harmed investors. It was a slap on the wrist compared to what could have happened, but the damage to Musk's reputation was permanent. The settlement, however, was just the beginning of the legal nightmare. Shareholders who'd been harmed by the stock manipulation filed class action lawsuits seeking billions in damages. The litigation dragged on for years. Discovery revealed even more damaging evidence of Musk's recklessness. Internal Tesla emails showed executives were blindsided by his tweets. Board members testified they'd begged him to get approval before making public announcements. But Musk had ignored all internal controls, operating as if rules didn't apply to him. And here's what makes this business crime particularly chilling. Musk never really faced consequences proportional to the fraud. Yes, he paid $20 million. Yes, he stepped down as chairman. But Tesla's stock eventually recovered and soared to unprecedented heights. Musk became the world's richest person. The company he nearly destroyed through securities fraud became one of the most valuable corporations on Earth. The shorts, who'd been right about Tesla's operational chaos, lost billions anyway, when the company eventually hit its production targets, and the market decided fundamentals didn't matter. But the funding secured saga revealed something far more disturbing about modern capitalism than just one CEO's fraud. It exposed how fragile the entire system is when built on personality cults and social media manipulation. Musk had moved markets with lies, and when caught, the punishment was trivial compared to the wealth he'd preserve by maintaining control. The message was clear. If you're powerful enough, rich enough, essential enough to your company's value, you can commit securities fraud and walk away with a fine you'll earn back in hours. The promised controls over Musk's tweets never really worked. He continued making controversial statements on social media. He mocked the SEC as the short seller enrichment commission. He tweeted material information without pre-approval, technically violating the settlement agreement. When challenged, he'd clarify or claim he was joking. The SEC, having secured their headline settlement, seemed reluctant to pursue further enforcement. It became clear that the agreement was toothless. Musk had successfully called their bluff. Years later, documents emerged showing just how close the PIF had come to actually funding the deal. After Musk's tweet, with Tesla's stock surging and global attention focused on the potential transaction, Al Rumayyan and the Saudi fund seriously considered making it happen. They ran the numbers. They consulted advisors. For a moment, it seemed like Musk's delusional announcement might retroactively become true. But the PIF ultimately balked at the valuation, the governance issues, and the reputational risk of partnering with someone who'd just committed securities fraud. The irony is exquisite. Musk's illegal tweet about secured funding destroyed any chance of actually securing that funding. The human cost of the funding secured fraud is harder to quantify, but no less real. Retail investors who bought Tesla shares based on Musk's false statements suffered real losses when the take-private fantasy collapsed. Employees who dedicated their lives to Tesla watched their CEO recklessly endanger everything they'd built. Board members who trusted Musk found themselves legally exposed and professionally embarrassed. And short sellers, vilified by Musk as evil manipulators, were actually performing the market's essential function of price discovery, identifying when a company's valuation exceeds its fundamentals. Many of them were right about Tesla's operational problems. They just couldn't have predicted a CEO desperate enough to commit fraud to destroy them. There's a deeper lesson buried in this dark business story about power, desperation, and the corrupting nature of unchecked ambition. Musk had built Tesla against impossible odds, revolutionizing the automotive industry, forcing the entire world to reckon with electric vehicles as the future. But that success had convinced him he was beyond rules, beyond accountability, beyond the constraints that govern normal corporate behavior. The funding secured tweet wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the inevitable result of a system that rewards charismatic founders with godlike authority and punishes them with trivial slaps when they abuse it. Today, the funding secured saga is taught in business schools as a case study in securities fraud. It's referenced in corporate governance seminars as an example of board failure. It's cited in legal journals as proof that even the most powerful CEOs aren't above the law. But all those lessons miss the point, because Elon Musk did it anyway. He committed one of the most blatant acts of securities fraud in modern history, and he won. Tesla's market capitalization eventually exceeded $1 trillion. Musk's personal wealth reached $300 billion. The shorts were decimated. The SEC moved on to other cases, and somewhere in the wreckage of failed enforcement and captured regulators, the lesson was clear. In modern American capitalism, fraud is just another business strategy. As long as you're too valuable to prosecute, too essential to your company's narrative, too rich to fail. 7 words. I'm considering taking Tesla private at $420. 2 more. Funding secured. 9 words that moved billions, exposed the fragility of market integrity, and proved that in the dark machinery of modern wealth and power, some people really are above the law. The funding was never secured, but Elon Musk's place in the pantheon of untouchable billionaires was. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.